Good afternoon, everybody. I want to take a moment and say thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is going to be a brief refresher on the return to work laws. We know with it being the start of a new semester, getting back into the back to school routine, it's always nice to go over those return to work laws and the tidbits that you guys need to be aware of. So we're going to cover a handful of things today. We'll do a brief introduction. We will cover some key terms of the return to work laws, the notification process. We'll also compare briefly the 2010 to the 2020 law, and we'll show you guys a couple of resources. My name is Jessica Trosclair. I'm the Return to Work Program Manager here at the Teachers Retirement System. And I also have Cherish Wilson with me.
Hello.
She is our Return to Work liaison, which many of you have been interacting with and emailing. So we're going to go through the next couple of slides together. If you have questions at any point in time, feel free to ask them. We may be able to answer them on the spot. If not, we will do a brief Q&A session at the end. So I always like to start off by giving you guys a big picture look at the actual laws that make up the collective that we refer to as the return to work laws. There are three. We've had three laws since June of 2022. They are separate of one another, so sometimes I refer to them as sister laws. But what's important to just kind of take away from that is that all three laws are active concurrently. The 2020 law did not replace 2010, 2022 did not replace 2020. They are all active. There's different criteria for when individuals fit into one or the other. Now for today, because you guys are K through 12, or most of you are probably K through 12, I'm only going to cover the 2010 and the 2020 law. 2022 for higher education, if you have questions about it, you're welcome to ask, but this webinar is not going to go into details on that particular law. With these laws, we've seen frequent changes, but what's important to really understand is when they are applicable. And that's anytime you guys are hiring a retiree of our system into a position that belongs to our system, so that belongs to TRSL. And those are some of the key terms that we'll go over. It's also important to keep in mind that these laws are only going to specify how a person's benefit is impacted. So at no point in time do they actually state whether a person can or cannot be hired, or whether they have to be terminated from a position. The language may come off that way, but really it's just that they're either eligible for a category to receive a benefit or to not receive their benefit while reemployed. Now, all retirees do have a waiting period. That is the same across all of the laws. It is 12 months, and it begins on the retiree's date of retirement. And this waiting period supersedes everything else that is in the law. So you may fill out forms or submit enrollments, which these are all things we're going to cover, but my system, our online system, is going to first look at when the individual retired. And if they're within that first year of retirement, we're going to automatically suspend their benefit. Okay, and that benefit would remain suspending for the duration of reemployment or until the waiting period expires, whichever happens first. There are no exceptions to this, not even critical shortage. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cherish and let her walk you through the next couple of sections.
Thanks, Jessica. So we're going to go into our key terms here. We have about 5 key terms that we think you all need to be aware of. These are things that you're commonly going to see in both the 2010 and the 2020 laws. These are going to apply to all retirees that will be submitted to TRSL, whether they're employed directly or via contract or corporate contract. For retiree, we're going to do a little bit of is or is not A retiree is a TRSL member who is drawing or has applied to draw benefits from us. This is going to be everyone in regular service, our ILSB retirees, and also our post-drop retirees. It is not the disability retirees, the LSU co-op retirees, and those that are retirees of other state or public retirement systems.
Yeah, so sometimes what we see is that we may have a member who worked for quite some time with a school district and then decides to sort of retire from that district. So they terminate employment with you. However, they go on to do some type of part-time employment or work at a different district. They don't apply to receive a benefit from the retirement system at that point. So frequently, I find that we are using the language of retired differently than you may be on your end. Those individuals would more so just be an inactive member, or they could have even decided to refund their contribution. So always want to check their status in EMIS to see if it is truly a retiree. The other thing that I want to note here is about the disability retirees. Once a disability retiree is eligible for regular service retirement, and that's typically based on their age, they're going to go through what we call service conversion. And once that process occurs, then they're no longer truly considered a disability retiree and subject to those disability laws. Instead, they're under return to work. And that's not necessarily a date that you have to be able to identify or to keep up with. That's something you guys could always ask us. But if you were to go online and try to enroll a disability person who is still disability, our system would block you. EMIS would say, you can't do this. It's not allowed because of their status. If they had converted to service and you went in and did sort of a fake enrollment, you tried to test it, it would give you the option. So that's one way that you can kind of utilize the online system. If you're not 100% certain what you're looking at or what the options are, just go out there and pretend that you're going to submit an enrollment and see what happens.
So we're going to go into TRSL position here. This is going to be all positions in K through 12, excluding those that are bus or maintenance positions, including those custodial positions as well. This is, for the big picture, this is all unclassified positions within higher education. It'll include all employment, including part-time, seasonal, temporary, and those by corporate contract or contract. This is going to be your teachers, tutors, back office staff, coaches, things like that. This is one of our really big terms. This is important for everybody to know. It's going to be the definition of a classroom teacher. I'm going to read it directly how it is written in the law. It is defined as any employee whose position of employment requires a valid Louisiana teaching certificate and who is assigned the professional activities of instructing pupils in courses in classroom situations for which daily pupil attendance figures for the school system are kept. So two big things, they have to have their Louisiana teaching certificate, and also they have to be taking attendance every day. I'm sorry.
We're actually going to show you guys towards the end a couple of examples of sort of a traditional classroom, some non-traditional classrooms, and a non-traditional teacher example. But this definition is important to keep in mind when you're looking at the 2010 group, especially because it is applicable for nearly all of the categories, but especially that substitute teacher category and proctor. They must meet the definition of a classroom teacher, and then on top of that be a sub or a proctor.
Okay, so we have direct employment and contract employment. These are going to be really important for your 2020 law group hirees. These are for direct employment, individuals that are hired directly by the school board. So these are the people that you hire directly, and they're normally paid by a W-2. The contract employment is going to be those who are hired by contract. That's independent contractors, those paid 1099, and those working through those companies where they are performing services for a company pursuant to its contract. So those Kelly services and places like that.
Yeah, so one of the things, this is a big point that a lot of people have asked about with this corporate contract is you are sort of working with a third-party company. You're entering into a contract with ABC company. And then that company goes out and hires individuals to provide the contracted services. You are not in control of, and in a lot of scenarios, not aware of the specific individuals that are hired to provide those services. So one of the things that I do encourage you to do is to think through what sort of policy or procedure you could put into place to do maybe some vetting on the front end or to have information relayed to you from those third-party companies so that you are made privy when a retiree is hired. Sometimes this could be just receiving some sort of a list from the third-party company of who has been hired. I've seen other agencies where there is a sort of form included in their onboarding packet or with that third-party company where they just ask everyone. Definitely something important to do because, you know, if you guys don't notify us that they're working, we're still going to see it on your annual audit, on your return to work audit. That could be a year after the contract was performed and paid. And at that point, our auditors are going to ask who performed the work, what were the services. They're looking to see if the laws should have applied. So if you guys could put something in place on the front end, that's going to help you significantly in being able to answer the questions from the auditors, but also mitigating those costs and recognizing when you may need to submit some kind of notification to us before that audit occurs.
And with that, we'll move on to our notification process. The big thing with notifications is you have to submit an enrollment for every TRSL position. This is going to be any retiree, whether they're employed directly or through corporate contract or contract, they have to be enrolled in EMIS. And this needs to be done within 30 days of hire, or you are subject to an overpayment. You also will have to submit a termination for every enrollment that you put out there in EMIS. Big picture is you all need to inform us of every retiree returning back to work in a TRSL position, whether that be direct or corporate contract. And it's important for you to submit your terminations in a timely manner so we can start the process of getting the retirees' benefit turned back on. It's also really important because these terminations serve as certification, and we cannot put in the term dates. We can correct them, but we can't put the initial ones in, and we cannot start the refunds without the online employment date from the employer. We'll move on to forms. These top two are the ones that you all typically fill out. The 15 ELEC is completed with the retiree. It's going to be required for every 2020 return to work enrollment that you make. It is also that form that you fill out when the retiree wants to switch from 2010 to 2020. The 15 CS is going to be that form that's required for the return for the critical shortage enrollment certification. So when you submit a critical shortage enrollment, you need to be submitting this 15 CS to us, whether that's through Webmaster or directly to me or Jessica. The 11 RTW and the 7A and D are more so for the retiree to fill out. The 11 RTW is going to be required for all those under option 2. This allows us to begin their benefit again, and it's really important that they submit this either before their termination date or right when they are terminated, because every day after that, they are not eligible for their benefit until we receive the form. The 7A is required to initiate the refund process, and then the 7D is the one that's specifically for direct deposit.
So I do just have a little note with the 15 ELEC. Like Chair said, this is required for every enrollment that you submit under the 2020 law. So that means from year to year, you might be having a single, individual person complete a new form over and over again. If you're doing a new enrollment, you need a new form. But also, it's not required at all for those in the 2010 group unless they are voluntarily electing to move to 2020. So one of the things that we are often told is that the form is included in your onboarding package, which I completely understand. That's totally fine. But what it has led to in a few scenarios is that the retiree is signing it under the assumption that it is mandatory, and then they are essentially forfeiting their right to remain in the 2010 group and not realizing they're doing so. So we've had a few grandfathered retirees, for example, who submitted the form because it was included in their packet or because they kept getting notifications online that their onboarding was not complete without a signature on that document. And then they were placed into an earnings limit. So they inadvertently put themselves in a stricter category of the law because they just were not aware, they weren't made aware that that form is optional. So again, I completely understand why you guys include it in your onboarding, why you kind of hand out all of the forms to everybody. But if possible, please make some sort of a disclaimer or remind retirees that it is not needed for everyone.
We'll go into what would happen if you were not to submit these enrollments and terminations in a timely manner. It's ultimately going to result in an overpayment of benefits, which is going to be charged to your account. For enrollments, if they are requiring a benefit suspension and it's submitted more than 30 days of hire, that's going to result in an overpayment for you. Some of these overpayments are inevitable, but the time in which you take to submit the enrollment tells us whether to charge you or the retiree for the enrollment. And that's really specifically with that option 2 enrollment for 2020. For the earnings limit, if you submitted more than 30 days after the hire, it's if the earnings limit is exceeded and the enrollment is submitted late. And that's also applicable if the monthly salary report is submitted late as well.
And so what that means is you guys might be reporting a person. You might be sending their contributions and their salary every month on time, but you haven't submitted that actual enrollment notification, which means I'm not actively looking at their earnings to see if they have exceeded. So once that enrollment comes in, then it's going to sort of trigger Cherish or I to look at their earnings. And if we discover that they have exceeded, that's again when it is charged to you guys, like Cherish said. Same thing if that monthly salary file came in late, that could be charged to you guys. So one of the sort of safety nets that we have that you could sort of lean on is your exception reports. So look for those retirees that pop up as reported, not enrolled, or even enrolled, not reported. That is definitely a safety net for you guys to help identify people who you've done one side of the notification process, but not the other.
And just to touch on that last bullet point there, it's also really important for y'all to be conscious of how you're submitting these enrollments and what you're clicking when you enroll them. Because if you submit a wrong enrollment and we have to go back and correct it more than 30 days after, that's going to result in an overpayment as well.
Right. So that would be if you had enrolled someone, let's say in the 2010 group, you enrolled them as a substitute teacher. And then you realize that they're not a substitute teacher, they're a substitute cafeteria worker. Well, that doesn't require, or it doesn't allow an earnings limit. It actually suspends their benefits. So when we have to remove that initial substitute teacher enrollment and then place them under the suspension category, that overpayment for reclassifying would be charged to you guys.
Okay, we're gonna go into switching laws. With this, I'm gonna go into what Portal A and B are first. These are going to be the markers that you see when you open up member summary, you scroll down and you see their employment history. It'll say portal type. It'll have Portal A, and that's going to be for the 2010 law group, and Portal B is going to be for the 2020 law group. This is a lot of time based on the retiree's date of retirement. And if they did not switch, it's going to be based strictly on that. The way that I discussed earlier, you switch between the portal A and B is by filling out that 15 ELEC for the retirees to switch from the 2010 to the 2020. And all the retirees in 2010 have the one-time chance, it is an irrevocable decision, to switch to these groups. It's also really important for them to be actively covered in the law before switching. So that means that they need to be enrolled in their 2010 law for at least 1 day before they can switch over to the 2020. And I think Jessica's going to cover on this special transfer group a little bit.
Yeah. So first of all, just to reiterate what Chair said about switching between Portal A and Portal B, everyone has that option. The 15 ELEC is required, but an online enrollment is what actually makes the switch go into effect. So a lot of times we get calls that people have submitted that paperwork. It is not actively reviewed by anyone in-house. It goes straight into the retiree's file. The law actually says that you guys are to keep the original of that form. We just keep a copy for, there it is. You guys do have to go online and submit, terminate the 2010 enrollment, re-enroll in Portal B. The special transfer group it's not a whole lot of people. It's not going to be very common, but just know that there are a handful of people who retired before 2020, whose employment history right now only reflects having worked in Portal B, which is the 2020 group. Those individuals are eligible to move into 2010. They can sort of go backwards, if you will. And the reason that they would do that is to utilize the critical shortage category, core subjects, or special leave. Now that 2020 has critical shortage, I don't think this group is going to be very active at all. It wasn't very active to begin with, but we are still seeing them. There are some of you that are not critical shortage districts. So there are individuals who could take advantage of this option so that they can utilize core subjects. It's less than 800 people, but I do just like to make you all aware in case a retiree asks you whether that is truly an option for them.
I just want to reiterate with those 1 day enrolls that if they do not have that 1 day, you're going to have to submit one enrollment for that 2010 group, term that, and then resubmit the enrollment for the 2020 once they make the switch. Here are a couple of examples from EMIS. This is what EMIS is going to look like when you pull up that member summary. At the top, it's going to have the status. It'll tell you how they're retired and then the date that they retired. And then when you scroll down in employment history, this will tell you what their return to work type is. This one specifically is that 1173, the grandfather group, and that's going to be under Portal A, which is 2010. This last one is showing that portal switch. So this will pop up if someone is eligible to switch to 2020.
And so these are just other examples of how EMIS, our employer portal, can be utilized to help you navigate the different provisions within the law. So again, if you guys can really nail down when the laws are in effect, so the positions that matter, the retirees that matter, et cetera, navigating the rest of it becomes easier if you know what you're looking for through your reports or through EMIS. Going in and keying in that social to look at their status, look at the status date to see if they're in their waiting period, looking at their portal history to see if they have the option to switch. And like I mentioned with one of the other examples, if you really still just aren't sure, go in and try to submit an enrollment. Click on the enrollment program, pretend that you're going to key in the info. And if this Portal A or Portal B pops up, that's telling you right there that they have the option to switch, and it's telling you which group they're currently in. So while it's not perfect, we have tried to put a few mechanisms in place that kind of help, give some hints along the way of what you're looking at or what should be expected in terms of the application of the law.
Okay, we're going to move into our 2010 versus 2020. This is just a little brief breakdown of the laws individually, and then it'll give us a little comparison of their similarities. We have a little Venn diagram here for y'all, just a little visual for our visual learners. The 2010 group is going to be position based, and 2020 is based on the way that these retirees are hired. And then the middle, of course, is what both laws have. 2010 specifically has the grandfather group, which is the 1173 enrollments, advanced speech, core subjects, special leave, and the retired member, which is the suspension category. 2020 has the return to work supplemental or option 2, and contract or corporate contract employment, which is the suspension in this law group. Both laws have an earnings limit. They are based on different things. Both of them are 25%. 2010 is based off of the annual benefit of the retiree, and 2020 is based off of their final average comp. And 2010 has a number of positions that are applicable for the earnings limit, and 2020 is anybody full-time or part-time as long as they are directly employed. And then, of course, there's critical shortage, which is applicable to both.
And so what this really depicts for me is that there's a lot of different options. There's a lot of different categories within these laws. There's a lot of overlap and a lot of nuanced differences, which I understand makes the laws a lot to navigate. But at the root of it, there's still really 3 potential things that are going to happen. They're going to receive their full benefit. They are not going to receive their full benefit, or they will receive their benefit with some type of earnings limit. So again, one of the sort of fundamentals of the law to understand is those potential impacts. And then from there, you're just navigating based on either the specific position or the way in which you've hired them, which of those 3 options is going to apply.
We're going to move into our 3 big no impact enrollments. This is going to be critical shortage, core subjects, and special leave, with the 2 latter being only applicable to the 2010 law group. For critical shortage, this is available to retirees that are certified in any subject where a shortage exists. This will be full-time, part-time, and then all of those ancillary positions. This does require that continuous declaration, and also for you all to submit that 15 CS, which will require that signature from the superintendent and also the personnel head. The core subjects is going to be specifically for directly employed retirees that are certified in math, science, ELA, or special education, with the exception of gifted and talented. This does not require a declaration process or form. However, if a non-retiree is available and applies to this position, it will kick the retiree out of being available for this category.
And just to clarify, we're saying it makes them ineligible for the category, not ineligible for the position. You can choose to retain the individual in that position if you would like to, but it means that their benefit could be impacted in other ways. And quite frankly, if it's not critical shortage, it's probably going to be a suspension.
For special leave, this is available for our directly employed again, but it has a lot more strict requirements. It has to be a retiree of age 62 or older with 30 or more years of service, and this is only available when filling maternity leave, military leave, sabbatical leave, or extended sick leave. This one does not require a declaration process or form as well.
I really think of core subjects and special leave as an alternative to critical shortage. They're critical shortage light, if you will. Both core subjects and special leave will sunset in 2027. So they're temporary in how long they're around for, but they're also temporary in nature, in that, you know, leave circumstances are temporary. But with the core subjects, you cannot guarantee a retiree can sit in that position with no impact to their benefit for an entire school year. With critical shortage, because you're going through the declaration process, that is a hire that could be made for the entire school year. So You will very likely have individuals that fit into all three of these categories if they are in the 2010 group. It's really just determining for your district which one makes more sense. If you're already declaring a critical shortage, you're doing those advertisements and notice at the university, you're keeping up with it for other positions, then it may be very easy for you to just certify this as a critical shortage as well, assuming that the other criteria in terms of applicants is met. If you're a larger district or you're a district that just does not go through critical shortage, then core subjects and special leave are definitely a quick and efficient way for you to fill that classroom, but it's meant to be sort of a stopgap, if you will. And again, that's just because they're temporary in nature. Now, with all three of these, the retirees do need to be directly employed, especially critical shortage for the 2020 group and core subjects and special leave.
We'll move on to this non-traditional classroom teacher slide that Jessica mentioned earlier. We're going to go through some classroom situation examples and some examples of non-traditional classroom settings. I'm going to start with those little boxes over to the side. We have our bottom two being those non-traditional classroom settings, which will be providing instruction to a homebound student or someone who is doing distance learning via the internet or other means, as long as daily attendance is being recorded. And then you have your top box, which is going to be your more traditional. This is where you are assigned to a class. You're providing instruction to a designated number of students in a designated area or grade. And then we're going to move over to this little blue part. And this is going to be your non-traditional classroom teachers. So this is kind of those support positions, not paraprofessionals, but like a extension of the teacher. This is somebody who is still recording attendance, is maintained by the teacher or whoever the child is primarily assigned. So this is the example that we use is special ed for this one.
Yeah, so, you know, when you look at the definition right there, it says that they're providing services that are a regular component of the child's instruction in that subject area. And so the example that we kind of came up with that we utilize for you guys is an interventionist or a resource teacher. More recent, we have these new high dose tutors, which feels like it fits into this category as well. Like Tara said, they're typically an extension of that primary teacher. They're in the same classroom, they're in the same subject area, but they're providing that additional instruction that you're required to provide under, for example, IDEA or some other federal or state regulation. So, you know, oftentimes we get a lot of questions asking about these sort of one-off scenarios or people that feel like they kind of fit. They're not a tutor, but they're not a teacher, or, you know, whatever, their position feels a little gray. And so I like to point people to this slide, but also to the FAQs in Index 15.1, where we kind of go into a little more detail about these definitions and what we consider filling a vacancy or part-time or whatnot. And hopefully this is an avenue, you know, by pointing this out, we're hoping that it's an additional avenue that you can utilize to fill those positions, whether it is an interventionist, some kind of teacher, the high dose tutor, fill those positions and fulfill your obligation to the students without having the retiree negatively impacted. Because I know that sometimes that is the difficulty. That's where you struggle to find balance. So I mentioned Index 15.1. I guess that segues perfectly into this slide. And after this is really kind of it. So we'll take questions if anyone has them. But we frequently reference our employer procedures manual, but recently it's kind of come to my attention that a lot of you, especially those of your districts that have had a lot of turnover or new staff members, you're maybe not as familiar with what our employer procedure manual is or where to find it. So these screenshots actually take you through the process of finding the procedure manual. It is not in EMIS, it's not in the employer portal. It is actually on our external website. You would navigate to the employer tab. It kind of looks like little file folders, and then you would select procedures manual. Once you're there, there's probably 18 chapters ranging from, eligibility to the retirement system, reporting earnings, correcting and certifying earnings, how to navigate through the retirement process. Of course, we have return to work. We have stuff on ORP. We even have a chapter on the actual reporting, the technical IT component of the reporting that you guys do to us. So there's a ton of information out there. Return to work is specifically covered in chapter 15. There is 15.0, which is an overview of the things that apply to all of the laws. And then the individual laws have their own sort of subchapter, 15.1, 0.2, and 0.3. Within each chapter, there are a handful of resources. The return to work flowchart is linked out here. And you may also find other short articles that we've put out there for the chapters that maybe give some extra tips or little tidbits here or there on hot topics. We will try to provide this slide deck after the webinar. It was recorded, so we do intend to post it online as well. These slides are primarily the same slides we have used in the past, just a little different order. We've included some screenshots, and that is a little new. We'll also cover very similar information in March. So hopefully you all will be able to attend our annual comprehensive training where we'll go over this information, maybe a little more detail on the specific provisions within the laws. And then I really don't see too many other questions. There is one, but I'm going to answer that one directly after the webinar. I don't think it's applicable across the board. We are always available if you need us. Many of you have Cherish or I's email address, but if you don't, you can always contact us at our department webmaster address. So that is webmaster.employerservices@trsl.org. That is for items that are return to work related or otherwise. Of course, trsl.org/employers is going to take you directly to the website for all of the tools that are relevant to you all. And our Member Information Center is always available for members for you, or they can always transfer you to us, or you can find your liaison information and our contact info on our website. So that we just want to say thank you for joining us today. And again, if you need anything, please reach out.